You can imagine how much this ducked him up. His father passed away a few hours later, if I remember correctly, and I was at school when this happened. What's the most horrible way to die that you've ever heard of that has actually happened? I'm so excited to see you again, viewer. Thanks for joining me for another story time. I'm Andrew, your host. Since you're here, you better smash the like button, subscribe, and ring that MF notification bell. Because if you don't, I'll sell all of your anime waifu body pillows. Lastly, this story time may be disturbing for some people, so be advised. That guy that got stuck upside down in the cave for like 2 days. The worst part was they almost had him out, but then ducking dropped him and he got stuck even more firmly. Girl's hair got caught in a lathe and pulled her in. She was alone in the machine shop at night, and the lathe kept spinning what was left of her around until people came in the following morning. Vlad the Impaler didn't stab a massive hole in you to prop you up on the stake. No, they shoved it up your asshole. Your intestines would be rearranged, and eventually you would die of either sepsis or dehydration. They'd make it so you were impaled just on the tips of your toes, and as you weakened and got more tired, you would essentially impale yourself as your legs began to give out. Dude tries to blow his head off with a shotgun. The first shot just blows most of his jaw off, but he lives. He gets up, walks to the bathroom mirror, looks at himself, reloads and finishes the job. That moment of looking in the mirror must have been pure hell. I have a friend whose dad tried this. He pointed the firearm too far forward and took a very good portion of his face off, but not all of it. Whether from shock or whatever, he regretted it immediately and stumbled quite a distance to his neighbor's house to have them call 911. I don't know him, but I've been at a birthday party he was at. You can tell something happened to him, but he doesn't look too terrible thanks to a bunch of surgeries. There was a comment on here about a worker at a steel works who committed suicide by jumping in the molten steel crucible. Because it was liquid, he expected to drown in it, unaware that the density of molten metal is the same as solid metal, so he just skittered across the surface and fried to death. Brutal. I used to work in a steel mill. I can't recall the lingo, but after molten steel was poured into the huge vats and then emptied, you'd need a couple guys to hop in and scrape the inside to get the remnants out. One time there was a miscommunication of some kind, and 3 guys had molten steel poured onto them. One survived. Severe radiation poisoning is pretty horrifying. It can take up to 2 weeks to kill you, during which time your body will fall apart at the molecular level while you're still alive. In some cases they can't even give you effective painkillers because your veins become so fragile they can't handle an injection. Oh, and just to duck with you, you'll start to feel better after a couple days, but that's just the calm before your skin starts to die. There was a Japanese, I think, guy who got super irradiated, and to study the effects they did everything they could to keep him alive despite him begging to die. I think it was after he died for the 4th time that they were unable to bring him back. Absolutely awful. You are correct. They were pumping him full of meds to keep him alive as long as possible. His cells were literally dead, and his white blood cell count dropped to 0. His body was already failing from day 1. His skin continued to melt off, multiple infections, heart attacks and seizures constantly. In the end, they really didn't even get that much useful data out of him. It was a complete waste. I really do believe this may be the worst one, even beyond scaphism. That guy that walked 700 meters off the boardwalk in Yellowstone with his sister and slipped into a boiling, acidic geyser comes to mind. That guy who jumped in a boiling geyser to save his dog also comes to mind. When they pulled him out, he had 3rd-degree burns over 100% of his body while he was still alive and conscious enough to realize he ducked up. When his friend pulled him out, he said something along the lines of, "That was stupid. How bad am I? I'm an idiot." Like, even though his nerve endings were probably shot pretty instantly, once he was in there, the idea that he was able to realize that he was going to die is ducked up. My aunt died in a car fire. She was driving drunk and went off the road and crashed her car. The fire started and the car was damaged to the point where she could not exit. Firefighters arrived and one tried to pull her out by her arm, but only got skin. It's awful to think about. Similar thing happened to a friend of mine. Many years ago when she was a toddler, she was in the car with her mother. They were in an accident and the car was wrecked. Her mum couldn't get out when a fire started. The mum climbed into the back seats and cloaked her body over that of my friend's. By the time emergency services got there, the mum was gone and my friend survived, but she was badly injured with burns over the majority of her body. My friend worked on the liver ward at the hospital. If you are suicidal and overdose on Panadol Tylenol, it takes 3 days to die in extreme pain. She said they would have people in weekly who had taken a Panadol Tylenol overdose, and by the time they got to the ward they had changed their mind. So this person who now wanted to live died an agonizing death filled with shame in front of their friends and relatives. Overdosing, in general, is not as calm as people think it might be. I accidentally took the wrong medication once. Somehow I had forgotten to throw away this medication. It was for depression, but did not work for me. Basically, I take 3 pills of my normal stuff, 3 pills of the other stuff are enough to odd. The pills looked the same size and color, and I was tired as duck and was not paying attention. By the time I realized something was wrong, I was in so much pain and could not move or scream. I had a stutter for a week after and memory issues for weeks. But because I have clinical depression, I did not go to the doctor after I was able to move again, because I was terrified they would think I did it on purpose and get committed. Damn, it was horrible. Edit. I am extra careful now with my medication. I take it at the same time every night, always at the same time. If I can't remember if I took my meds at night, I will just skip a night to be extra careful. I don't go through withdrawals of my meds unless I stop for a week. I know that because due to a medical error, I could not get a refill for a full week. Or there's always being skinned alive, aka flaying. Generally the victim starts with being left naked out in the hot sun for a day or two in order to get severe sunburn. If it's winter or just bad weather, a quick dunk in boiling water does the same thing. They're then strung up by the hands, and a very sharp knife is used to make long straight incisions. The burn helps separate the skin from the underlying connective tissue. The skin is then peeled off from the muscle in large sheets using a hot knife. Between the burn and the hot knife, a skilled flayer could remove the skin with minimal blood loss, meaning the victim did not bleed out. Most common actual cause of death would then be hypothermia, as the skin is a vitally important part of your body's ability to regulate its temperature, or if they were super unlucky they'd die of sepsis, blood poisoning due to infection, as much as days later. And of course the victim would be kept conscious during the entire procedure. Since someone already said scaphism, my second worst one is strychnine poisoning. It can be inhaled, consumed, or absorbed through wet tissue, like the nose, mouth, or eyes. It causes your voluntary nervous system to go into overdrive, which makes every muscle in your body contract and spasm uncontrollably. These spasms can be strong enough to rip the muscles off your bones. If untreated, death usually comes within 2 to 3 hours, either from asphyxiation, your chest muscles spasm so hard your ribs cannot expand, or from sheer exhaustion. There is no antidote to strychnine, although if caught immediately you can be put in sensory deprivation on massive doses of muscle relaxers. If you survive the first 24 hours, you usually live. That's a big if. This story is extremely disturbing and sad. Back when I was in 7th grade, I had this friend, Laser, who was a year older than me. He had 3 siblings, 2 of which were much younger. He also lived pretty close to where I lived. It's important to note that we live in the countryside. One day, while we're at school, the principal and the teachers are freaking out, kids are starting to cry. I asked one of the kids what happened, and I just stood there horrified for a moment. Turns out that Laser's father was out on the field on a combine harvester working with his friend when something got stuck in the rotary thresher. Laser's dad went back there to check it out, but after a while his friend thought that he was done and just decided to turn the harvester back on. However, his leg sleeve got caught up in the thresher and started to quickly pull him in, basically crushing his leg and soon enough, his other leg as well. By the time his friend heard the screams and stopped the harvester, both of his legs were ripped off of his body and crushed completely, only his upper half was left. His own son, Laser, had to pick up what was left of his father and carry him to the car to get him to hospital immediately. His youngest child was there, watching all of this unfold, but I don't think he could comprehend it at the time. Having lived very far away from the nearest hospital, they had to basically meet the ambulance halfway there in order to not lose any precious time, since his father, by some miracle, was still alive, though unconscious. All the way there, his own son had to hold him in his arms and wrap him in his clothing and using his belt, trying desperately to stop the bleeding as much as he could. You can imagine how much this ducked him up. His father passed away a few hours later, if I remember correctly, and I was at school when this happened. Thanks for watching. What did you think of the story time? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any more story times.